My wife cheated on me and even had the audacity to try to humiliate me. It was supposed to be a perfect dinner, a date planned by her in one of the most expensive and sophisticated restaurants in New Jersey. The kind that impresses anyone, except me. I already knew what was coming. I knew about the furtive glances, the messages exchanged in secret, the smiles that were no longer meant for me. She thought she had everything under control, that I was blinded by confidence and routine. I thought I would fall for the careful act I had been planning for weeks, maybe even months. But what she didn't know was that I also had a plan. The dinner started like any other between a couple trying to keep up appearances. Candles, soft music in the background, polite waiters bringing dishes that looked like works of art. She looked beautiful, as always. The fitted dress, the meticulously styled hair, and that calculated smile. That smile that, a while ago, left me speechless, now felt like a knife about to cut. She started with the usual phrases, a ridiculous attempt to sound casual and keep the conversation light. He talked about work, about home renovations, about the new restaurant he would like to try next weekend. But I couldn't hear anything. My mind was already fixed on the moment that was to come. In the revelation. She didn't know, but I had already done my homework. Everything was timed, every detail planned to the millimeter. I already knew about the betrayal. "You're so distracted lately," she said jokingly as she absently stirred her red wine. "Everything is fine." I could hardly believe the irony of the question. I smiled, a light smile, but one that carried a bitterness that she didn't notice. "Not yet." "Yes, everything is great. Better than you imagine." The minutes dragged by. She was waiting for the right moment to bring up the subject that would change everything, for her. Maybe she was nervous, afraid that I would react badly. Maybe she thought she would convince me that this was a normal conversation, that she had nothing to hide. But while she was playing this silly game, little did she know that I had already changed the rules. I picked up the wine glass and slowly swirled it, watching the dark red liquid move. It was then that she finally cast the bait. "We need to talk about something important." I felt a hint of anxiety in his tone. Inside, my heart was beating fast, as if I were on the edge of a cliff. But on the outside, I was calm, almost indifferent. And then she started. She gave a careful speech, full of half-truths and omissions, trying to appear sincere while making banal excuses about how things weren't right between us, about how maybe we needed some time. I was impressed by her coldness, by her ability to manipulate words as if she were doing me a favor. She hadn't yet said the word divorce, but I knew it was on the tip of her tongue. I just needed a pause, a short breath to set everything in motion. "Funny, because I have something to say too." She raised her eyebrows in surprise and leaned forward. I could see the worry start to appear in his eyes. Perhaps he was thinking that I had noticed something, that I suspected his escapades. But I would never have imagined that I knew everything. I took a deep breath and prepared to cut what was left of that ridiculous theater. "I want a divorce," he said, clearly and directly. The impact was immediate. She blinked, astonished, and was silent for a few seconds, as if the words didn't make sense. "What? Do you think I don't know?" I continued, not bothering to lower my voice. "About the hidden meetings, the lies, the lame excuses. You think I don't know that you've been cheating on me this whole time?" She turned pale, and for a moment I thought she was going to faint right there. But he soon recovered, and his expression changed from surprise to a mixture of anger and fear. This isn't what you think. I can explain." "No need," I said, cutting her off before she started babbling her pathetic excuses. "Because I already understand everything. And I'll tell you something. I'm not the one who's going to come out of this humiliated." It was then that I looked at the restaurant door, and a man entered. He was a friend of ours, someone she trusted, someone she would never imagine being involved. She didn't know it, but he had been my eyes and ears all this time. He had told me every detail, every message, every suspicious movement. And there he was, ready for the last move of my plan. She saw him and her face contorted in confusion, then panic. It was like watching someone slowly sink into quicksand. And it was at that moment, as she tried to understand what was happening, that I realized, as cruel as it seemed, it needed to happen. It was cold justice, but necessary. The friend approached, placing his hand on my shoulder and smiling reassuringly, as if it were just another normal night. But I knew it wasn't. "I think you have something to show her," he said, and I pulled my phone out of my pocket. "A few messages, and photos, perhaps." Her eyes widened, and I could see the terror slowly growing in her expression. She knew she was cornered, and everything she could say or do no longer mattered. This was the end, and she could no longer control the narrative. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. And there, in that moment, with all the elegance of the restaurant around us, I saw her mask finally fall. I saw fear and despair emerge, and I knew there was no turning back. She had planned everything to humiliate me, to leave me vulnerable and weak, but now she was the one on her knees, with no way out. I didn't know what she hoped to achieve at that dinner, whether she thought she could manipulate me into accepting the betrayal, or perhaps bend me into giving in to something she wanted. But what she never imagined was that I would turn the tables like that the revelation would come from someone she never suspected was on my side. And then, as she shook, still trying to understand the extent of the damage, I said the last thing that needed to be said that night. "That's it. It's over. No more excuses, no more chances. And tomorrow morning, we start sorting out the divorce papers." As she took in the words, I could see she was devastated. But I didn't feel sorry. No more. Because that was the moment she had chosen, and now, it was time to deal with the consequences. And this was just the beginning. But how did it all get to this point? What led to that dinner that ended with an exposed betrayal and a request for divorce? Welcome to our channel. Here, we do not support any type of betrayal. The stories you will hear are fictional, but they reveal a brutal truth: betrayal destroys lives, corrodes relationships and leaves deep scars. Our goal is to show, bluntly, how these choices affect everyone around them. Get ready, because today's story is shocking, full of twists and emotions. So sit back, take a deep breath and let yourself be carried away by this surprising drama. The couple looked perfect in everyone's eyes. Ethan and Julia had been together for over 10 years, and to their friends and family, they were an example of a solid, successful marriage. They met while still in college, he studying business and she studying arts, and from their first meeting on campus, it seemed like they had found something rare, a connection that transcended words, a chemistry that made them smile just by being near each other. Ethan was a meticulous, disciplined, and practical man. Owner of a small marketing company that he had built himself, he was passionate about what he did, and his career reflected that. Julia, on the other hand, was the opposite: creative, spontaneous and full of life, working as a curator at a local art gallery, where each exhibition was a new opportunity to express her passion for the beautiful and the unexpected. But, to those looking from the outside, the differences between them did not seem like problems, but rather complements. Ethan was the balance to Julia's impulsiveness, and she was the energy he needed to get out of his comfort zone. They went through a lot together: early financial challenges, difficulties adapting to the job market, building a house that reflected Julia's impeccable taste and Ethan's impeccable organization. To those who observed them, the relationship was stable and prosperous, like a perfectly framed painting. In recent months, however, something has started to change. Little things that, for others, might go unnoticed, but that, for those who live day to day in a marriage, were clear signs that something was not right. Ethan came home late from work almost every night, but not because he was overwhelmed, it seemed like he was avoiding being home. Julia, who had previously been thrilled with the news of the day, was now limited to lukewarm conversations, without the same excitement as before. Saturday nights, which used to be reserved for dinners and outings together, were now often replaced by lame excuses and separate outings. In the house they shared, built with so much care, silence had become a constant presence. It was as if an invisible abyss had begun to open between them, silently, day by day, widening the emotional distance. Ethan still loved Julia, or at least that's what he told himself. There were nights when he found himself looking at her as she slept, trying to find in the softness of her sleeping face some answer to the disconnect that had settled between them. But she seemed worlds away, even here, so close. Julia, in turn, felt constant restlessness. There was an unease she couldn't explain, a feeling that something important had changed, and she couldn't say what. Maybe it was the fact that Ethan no longer looked at her with the same sparkle in his eyes, or that conversations that were once easy and light now seemed forced and superficial. But Julia had her own way of dealing with it. She became more involved in her work, immersed herself in the gallery's exhibitions, and began spending more time away from home, filling the void with commitments and social events that distracted her from the feeling that something was slipping through her fingers. It was an ordinary Wednesday when Ethan received the message that changed the course of his week. Julia suggested dinner that Friday at a sophisticated restaurant in the city center, a place they used to go to celebrate special dates. The message was simple, without emoticons or affectionate phrases. Just a dry and direct invitation. He read the message several times, trying to decipher some subtext. Maybe she wanted to discuss something important, or maybe it was just an attempt to revive a moment that seemed lost for so long. When Friday finally arrived, Ethan found himself more nervous than usual. The routine of the day seemed strangely out of place, as if he was just waiting for the moment to sit at that table and find out what Julia had to say. He got ready carefully, wearing a shirt he knew she liked, and tried to mentally rehearse the possible conversations that might arise. At the same time, his mind was filled with conflicting thoughts, questions he didn't know how to ask, answers he feared hearing. Julia was also getting ready. She spent more time than usual choosing a dress and getting ready. Deep down, I knew that night would be different, although I didn't know exactly how. In the mirror, I observed the reflection of a woman who seemed complete and well-resolved, but who, inside, hid uncertainties that were about to explode. With one last touch of makeup, she took a deep breath and prepared herself for whatever came next. The restaurant was busy when they arrived. The tables were filled with couples and groups of friends who were laughing and chatting happily, but there was something in the air that made the atmosphere heavy for Ethan and Julia. When they sat down, the waiter brought the menu and took their drink order, leaving them alone for a few minutes, which only increased the tension. For a few moments, they just looked at each other, not saying a word, trying to find comfort in the familiarity of being together, but unable to ignore the elephant in the room. "You look beautiful," Ethan said, breaking the silence. Julia smiled tensely and thanked him, but the response sounded automatic, without warmth. Then, she commented on the restaurant's decor, trying to ease the tension, but the words came out dry, empty. Soon, they realized that any attempt to pretend that everything was normal would be futile. The conversation was lukewarm for the first few minutes, until Julia finally let out a deep sigh and placed the glass of wine on the table, still half full. "We need to talk." The words hung in the air, carrying a weight that seemed difficult to sustain. Ethan knew something serious was coming, but he didn't know how prepared he was to listen. There was a feeling of déjà vu, as if he was about to witness a moment he had imagined countless times but always refused to accept. "I know," he replied, with a tone that mixed resignation and curiosity. He leaned forward, clasping his hands together on the table. "What do you want to talk about?" Julia hesitated for a moment, as if trying to find the right words, or perhaps the right tone, to soften the impact of whatever she was going to say. But before she could respond, the waiter returned with the starters, interrupting the moment, bringing a brief sense of relief. They smiled politely at the waiter, thanking him, and once again silence fell between them, but now it was a silence filled with expectations, unspoken questions and a tension that threatened to explode at any moment. As Ethan absently cut through the doorway, he thought about how this dinner was a cruel metaphor for their marriage, beautiful on the outside, but with an invisible fissure that compromised it on the inside. Everything seemed perfectly orchestrated, but it was as if every gesture, every word, every movement was charged with a truth about to be revealed. A truth they could no longer ignore. The night wore on, and every minute that passed seemed to bring them closer to the breaking point. What Ethan didn't know was that this conversation would not only be about what he feared, but also about something he had never predicted. Dinner proceeded strangely, with a palpable tension that seemed to grow by the minute. Ethan and Julia tried, in vain, to keep the conversation on light topics, as if they wanted to postpone the inevitable. But each word sounded mechanical, devoid of any naturalness, and they both knew it was a matter of time before everything was put on the table, literally and figuratively. Ethan watched Julia as she talked about the latest exhibition at the gallery, but he couldn't concentrate on the words. His mind was absorbed, searching for fragments of answers that could explain what had happened to them. Julia continued to speak, but her voice was distant, almost as if she were reciting something by heart. Ethan felt a growing chill in his stomach, a silent anxiety that made him more alert to her every gesture and movement. He watched how she stirred the wine glass, how she avoided looking at him directly, and every little detail seemed to scream something that hadn't yet been said. Maybe it was just a sensation, but he knew there was something hidden behind that behavior, something he still couldn't fully identify. "Do you still like working at the gallery?" he asked, almost without thinking. It was an innocent question, but it carried a heavy subtext. Julia hesitated for a moment before answering, as if she knew each word would need to be carefully chosen. "Of course," she said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "It's what I love to do." For a moment, Ethan felt like letting out everything he'd been swallowing for the last few weeks, demanding answers, demanding the truth. But he knew it wouldn't be that simple. He knew Julia well enough to know that if he tried to force her to reveal something, she would clam up even more. He needed to find a way to get her to open the door herself. And perhaps that was what made him so restless, the need to discover the truth, and the fear of what it might be. Julia, in turn, struggled to maintain her composure. It was clear to her that Ethan sensed something was wrong, and she wondered how much he knew or suspected. He had planned that night carefully, trying to make it seem like an opportunity for them to reconnect, but every time he looked into her eyes, she felt vulnerable, like he could see through every lie she had told. It was not easy to maintain the role of a devoted wife while carrying the weight of her own guilt and secrets. As the conversation dragged on, Ethan felt his phone vibrate in his pocket. Discreetly, he glanced at the screen and saw a message from a familiar number. It was Ryan, his best friend and someone he had shared his suspicions with over the past few months. Ethan hesitated for a moment, but eventually opened the message. "I have something important to tell you. I need you to come find me after dinner." Ethan frowned in confusion. This seemed important, but he couldn't imagine what Ryan might have to say that couldn't wait. In any case, the message only made the feeling that something much bigger was about to happen that night grow even more. He put the phone back in his pocket, trying to hide the uneasiness that was taking over him. Julia noticed, but said nothing. She just watched him over the wine glass, as if trying to read his thoughts. Finally, the meal came to an end, and Ethan felt like he couldn't put it off any longer. He knew he needed to find Ryan and find out what was going on, but first he needed to test it one last time, throw a bait to see how Julia would react. He placed the napkin on the table, leaned back in the chair and faced her directly, letting the silence speak for a few seconds. "Julia," he began, slowly, choosing his words carefully, "do you think we're okay?" The question hung in the air, and Julia was momentarily speechless, as if she didn't know what to answer. But then she forced another smile, that rehearsed smile he had seen so many times, and nodded. "Of course. Why wouldn't we be?" Ethan didn't respond right away. He just looked at her, waiting for something to change in her expression, some sign that she would give in and tell the truth. But there was nothing. Just an uncomfortable silence that seemed to echo between them, and then, slowly, he shook his head. "Okay," he said finally. "I think I'll meet Ryan after here. He said he needs to talk to me." It was just a casual comment, but Julia froze, and Ethan noticed. Her eyes wavered for a second, and she lowered her head, taking a sip of her wine as if trying to hide her nervousness. "Oh, really?" she replied, trying to sound nonchalant. "And what does he want?" "I don't know," Ethan said, and that was true. But for the first time that night, he felt like he was closer to understanding what was happening. "I guess I'll find out." Julia just nodded, and then they left the restaurant, an awkward silence between them as they walked to the car. Ethan knew something was wrong, but he wasn't sure he wanted to find out the extent of it all. At the same time, I could no longer live in uncertainty, trapped in a relationship that seemed to be falling apart every day. He needed to know the truth, no matter how painful it was. When they got home, Julia went straight to her room, and Ethan felt his phone vibrate again. Another message from Ryan. "I don't want to alarm you, but you need to know something. It's about Julia." Ethan felt a chill run down his spine. That only confirmed what he already feared. Ryan was a longtime friend, someone he trusted like a brother, and if he had something important to say, then that could only mean one thing. Ethan responded quickly, agreeing to meet at a nearby cafe in a few minutes. A short time later, he was sitting at the coffee table, his hands shaking around his cup of hot coffee. Ryan arrived soon after, and their greeting was brief, as if they both knew there was no time to beat around the bush. Ryan sat up, pulled his cell phone out of his pocket, and without saying a word, showed the screen to Ethan. Ethan looked, and his world stopped. There, on the screen, were the photos he didn't want to believe existed. Julia, smiling, holding hands with another man. In another photo, they kissed, hugging each other as if they were the only couple in the world. Ethan's heart raced, and he felt like the ground was opening up beneath his feet. All the suspicions, all the nights of doubt and uncertainty, now had a cruel and definitive confirmation. Ryan spoke, his voice low and serious. "I knew you needed to know, and I wanted it to be before you made any decisions. I couldn't leave you in the dark, Ethan." Ethan couldn't speak. He just kept looking at the photos, feeling the crushing weight of betrayal that could now no longer be denied. The betrayal was there, naked and raw, revealed in an inescapable way, and he knew that from that moment on, nothing would be the same again. But what he still didn't know was that this betrayal was just the tip of the iceberg. And the truth that was about to come would change everything in ways he could never imagine. Ethan left the cafe feeling empty, as if he had been drained of any emotion. The photos Ryan had shown him were still fresh in his mind, and despite the initial shock, something inside him seemed to have prepared for it. He had already felt the coldness in the way Julia looked at him, the distant way she spoke, but seeing her with another man, so close and smiling, destroyed any hope he still had of saving the marriage. Ryan followed him outside, watching with a worried expression. "Ethan, I know it's a lot to process, but you need to know, it doesn't just end there. There's something I haven't told you yet." Ethan turned to him, eyes filled with despair mixed with bitter curiosity. "What do you mean? What else can there be beyond this?" Ryan sighed deeply, as if he was preparing to release a truth that carried immense weight. He looked around, as if to make sure they were truly alone. "I didn't want you to find out like this, but it's better that you know the whole truth now so you can deal with it at once." Ethan felt a pang of anxiety in his chest, as if he sensed that what was coming next was even more devastating than the images he had seen. "Speak quickly, Ryan," he said, his voice almost pleading. "What is it?" "I've been looking into it, like you asked," Ryan began, hesitantly. "And over the last few weeks, I've been able to talk to some people, find out some things. Ethan, Julia is not only cheating on you, but she has been using these outlets to manipulate you. And whoever is helping her with this, whoever facilitated this betrayal, is someone you would never imagine." Ethan frowned, confused. "Like this? Who could?" Ryan blurted out the word like it was poison, and Ethan's face froze in an expression of pure disbelief. I was the one who helped Julia cheat on you. For a moment, Ethan's world stopped. He looked at Ryan, trying to understand if this was a bad joke, some twisted way to relieve tension. But Ryan wasn't smiling. He was serious, almost sad, as if he knew he was destroying the trust of someone he cared deeply about. What? Ethan spluttered, unable to process the information. What are you saying, Ryan? Did you help her? How did you? Why? Calm down, let me explain, Ryan pleaded, raising his hands in a conciliatory gesture. I know it sounds horrible, and it is. But you need to understand why I did it. Ethan took a step back, as if he needed space to breathe, to process what he was hearing. His best friend, the person he trusted most, had helped his wife cheat on him. Julia's betrayal was already devastating, but knowing Ryan was involved in it was like being hit while already lying on the ground. She came to me a few months ago, Ryan began, his voice shaking with guilt. She said things between you were bad, that she felt like she needed something you couldn't give. I was torn, Ethan. She looked desperate, like she was on the verge of a breakdown, and I didn't know how to help. I thought if she could resolve this need, you might find a way to save the marriage. Save the marriage? Ethan exploded, voice full of disbelief. And your idea of helping was it to cover up her betrayals? Make it easier so she could trick me more easily? How did you think this would help? Ryan ran a hand through his hair, frustrated with himself. I know, it was stupid, it was the worst decision I ever made. But I let myself be convinced that I was doing both of you good. I thought, that if she could solve that part of her life, maybe she would go back to being the wife you knew, and everything would be fine. But I was wrong. And when I saw what was really happening, when I realized she had no intention of stopping, I knew I needed to tell you. Ethan stared at him with a blank stare, trying to process how everything had become so twisted. So, you knew all along? From the beginning? He shook his head in disbelief. And while I was there, opening up, telling you my suspicions, were you helping her? Ryan, how could you? I didn't know how to stop, Ryan admitted, voice breaking. When I realized how far I had gone, I was already arrested. I wanted to tell you, but I knew there was no way to do it without destroying everything. I was terrified, Ethan. I made a huge mistake, and there is no excuse for that. Ethan's anger turned into deep pain. He felt as if everything he knew was crumbling around him. And why did you decide to tell me now? What changed? Ryan sighed again, and this time his gaze hardened, as if he was finally preparing to reveal the last piece of the puzzle. Because I discovered something that changes everything, Ethan. Something she's hiding, which is much bigger than just a betrayal. What are you talking about? Ethan asked, no longer able to deal with any more surprises. She's got her eye on the company, Ethan, Ryan said, and the words seemed to cut through the air like blades. From the beginning. The betrayals, the manipulations, everything was part of a plan to push you away and weaken you, so that you could take control over what you built. I found out that she has been in contact with a lawyer to try to position herself in a way that, when you split up, she could claim a larger share of the company. She doesn't just want a divorce, she wants to destroy you. Ethan felt the air leave his lungs, as if he had been hit by a punch straight to the stomach. Are you saying that she planned all of this? That this betrayal was just a piece of something bigger? Yes, Ryan confirmed, voice low but firm. And I can't continue to be a part of this. I thought I was helping in the wrong way, but now I see that I was manipulated just as much as you. And when I realized what was at stake, that she was willing to go over everything and everyone to get what she wanted, I could no longer remain silent. Ethan was silent, trying to take it all in. The revelation was devastating, and his mind was spinning, struggling to connect all the dots. He remembered every conversation, every fake smile, every lame excuse Julia had given, and now it all made sense in a cruel way. She wasn't just emotionally betraying him, she was plotting against him, against everything he had built. And Ryan, the friend he thought would always be by his side, had become a key player in that diabolical plan. Ethan felt a rage rise within him, a rage he didn't know he was capable of feeling. But along with the anger was a cold, almost calculated determination. He knew he couldn't just let it go. Julia had played all her cards to manipulate him, to destroy him and take everything he had. And now, he needed to figure out a way to turn the tide. "I'll face it," he said finally, his voice low but full of resolve. "If she wants to destroy everything, then she will have to deal with the consequences. And you, Ryan. I still don't know how I'm going to deal with what you did, but at least now I know the truth. And that's a start." Ryan nodded, looking relieved to finally have everything revealed. "Ethan, I know I can't fix what I did, but I'm here to help. Any way you need it." Ethan didn't respond. He just looked ahead, at the horizon, thinking about how everything had unfolded so darkly and unexpectedly. He knew that what came next would be difficult, that he would need to face Julia in a way he never imagined. But now, armed with the truth, he was ready for confrontation. The mask had fallen, and the true face of betrayal had finally been revealed. Ethan returned home that night feeling like a stranger in his own life. The world as he knew it had crumbled before his eyes, and now, every piece of information, every revelation, only heightened the sense of betrayal and loss. As he drove through the dark streets, his mind whirled frantically, trying to find a way to deal with everything. He wanted to confront Julia right then and there, to extract from her all the truths that were still hidden. But something inside him made him hesitate. He needed a strategy, he needed to think before he acted, because he knew that now, more than ever, it was a game he couldn't lose. When he arrived home, the house was silent, and for a moment, he stopped at the entrance, contemplating the facade of the place that was once a symbol of safety and comfort. Now it looked like a scene from an empty theater, a stage where a drama he hadn't even suspected had been played out. He entered, the sound of his footsteps echoing through the room, and headed towards the bedroom. Julia was there, lying in bed, leafing through a magazine as if it were any other night. She looked up and smiled when she saw him, but there was an air of curiosity in her gaze. "You're late," she commented, trying to sound casual, but there was an underlying nervousness in her voice. She knew Ethan had gone to find Ryan, and was wondering what he knew. Ethan didn't respond right away. He just walked to the closet and took off his jacket, feeling the weight of each movement. He turned to her, watching her for a moment, trying to see beyond the surface, to the woman he thought he knew so well. "Ryan told me some interesting things," he said finally, and saw the slight hardening of Julia's face, a small crack in the carefully maintained facade. "Oh, yeah," Julia replied, trying to keep her tone light. "And what did he say?" Ethan approached the bed, sitting on the edge but keeping what seemed like an intentional distance. "He told me that not only are you involved with someone else, but that you have a plan to get me out of the company. Who has been trying to prepare for this for months, maybe even years. That all this manipulation is part of something much bigger than just betrayal." Julia hesitated, her face turning pale for a moment before regaining her composure. "Ethan, you are exaggerating. I made mistakes, yes, but it's not at all what you think." Her voice was firm, but he could hear the subtle tremor that betrayed her nervousness. "Don't try to manipulate me again," he said, his voice cold. "I know you have a lawyer. I know you've been meeting with him, planning how to get more than you deserve, how to use this betrayal to manipulate me during the divorce. And now I want to know, why? Why are you doing this?" Julia took a deep breath, as if preparing for a response. She seemed to be on the verge of a breakdown, but still trying to maintain control. "Because I was tired, Ethan," she began, her voice cracking slightly. "Tired of being the second most important thing in your life. The company, the work, everything always came before me. Do you think I didn't notice? I needed something for myself. Something that would make me feel alive again. Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. He knew there were problems in the marriage, he knew things weren't going well, but he never imagined she felt so suffocated, so invisible. And you thought the solution was to stab me in the back. Not talking, not trying to resolve it. Just, manipulate and betray. Julia closed her eyes, tears beginning to accumulate. I didn't want it to be like this. But I didn't know what else to do. When things started to fall apart, I thought I could control the situation. That I could come out of this with my head held high, but I got more and more involved, until there was no way out. Ethan looked at her, trying to find some truth in her words. He wanted to hate her, he wanted to see only the villain who had conspired against him, but what he saw was a lost woman, trapped in her own bad choices. And so, you decided that if I wasn't giving you what you wanted, you were going to take it? Steal what I built for both of us. Julia faced him, and this time, there were no more disguises. Yes, she admitted, voice barely above a whisper. I wanted to take control away from you, because it seemed like you were never willing to give up anything. And I thought that if I had an advantage, if I could use this betrayal as a way to weaken you in the process, I would get what I wanted. But, now I see that I was wrong. I lost control of what I was doing. What Julia didn't know was that Ethan had already decided he wouldn't let this end the way she planned. He was not willing to lose everything he had fought for so long. And now, with Ryan's help, he had an ace up his sleeve. He had contacted her lawyer, found out about the moves she was making, and had obtained evidence that showed Julia was trying to embezzle funds, using a maneuver that would compromise not only the company, but also her future. What you don't know, Julia, he said, his voice calm but full of determination, is that you've already lost. I spoke to your lawyer. I know that you have been using the company as a guarantee for operations that even I didn't know about. And now that that's clear, you're going to have to deal with the consequences. I'm not just going to let you walk away from this without paying for everything you've done. And I'm not just talking about money. You wanted to play with fire, and now you're going to get burned. Julia was silent, her eyes wide, her words stuck in her throat. She knew she had gone too far, but she never imagined Ethan could turn the tide like this. She thought she had control, that she knew all the moves he could make, but now she was faced with a reality she hadn't anticipated. She was cornered, and Ethan, in a way she had never seen before, was prepared to take this battle to the end. Do you want to destroy me, Ethan? She asked, her voice weak, as if pleading for some hope of redemption. I don't want to destroy you, Julia, he replied, standing up and facing her. I just want you to understand what it means to live with the consequences of your choices. I will fight for everything I built. And if that means facing you, then so be it. And with that, Ethan turned and left the room, leaving Julia alone, immersed in the silence and chaos that she herself had created. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, that the battle was far from over. But now, for the first time in a long time, he felt in control. And he knew that, whatever the outcome, he was prepared to face everything head-on. The days that followed were like a storm for Julia. Ethan had acted quickly, gathering all the evidence necessary to ensure that her actions were not only exposed, but that her intentions to usurp the company were blocked before she could even try to contest it. When her lawyers learned that Ethan was aware of her every move, they backed off, advising Julia to accept a deal that would be much less advantageous than the plan she had devised. Julia found herself alone, faced not only with the failure of her plan, but with the painful realization that she had lost everything. The separation was quick and brutal, just like the divorce. Ethan used every piece of evidence he had, showing how she had acted unfairly and manipulatively, not only in their relationship, but also in her attempts to harm the company. In court, there was no denying it. Ethan obtained most of the assets they had built together, and with the financial arrangement advantageous to him, Julia's attempt to take advantage of the situation turned into a bitter defeat. While signing the final papers, Julia realized she was alone. The other man she had been involved with disappeared as soon as things began to fall apart, and she realized, too late, that she had risked everything for an illusion. The people who had supported her before moved away, and now, she found herself without her husband, without the status, and without the control she thought she could maintain. When Ethan left the courtroom for the last time, he didn't even look back. For him, that story had ended there, and there was nothing left to discuss. But it wasn't just Julia who had to face the consequences. Ryan also had to deal with the reality of what he had done. He and Ethan had a final conversation, in which Ethan made it clear that he couldn't simply forgive what Ryan had done, even after everything had been revealed. "I understand why you did what you did," Ethan said, his voice cold but controlled. "But that doesn't erase the fact that you betrayed me. You broke a trust that took us years to build, and I don't know if that can ever be restored." Ryan tried to argue, tried to explain how he had been deceived, how he had believed he was helping, but Ethan remained firm. "You had a choice," he replied, cutting off any hope of immediate reconciliation. "And you chose to side with her, knowing what that would mean for me. So now I'm making my choice, and it doesn't include you." Ryan left, taking with him the guilt and shame of his own actions. He knew that no matter how hard he tried to justify his reasons, he had made the wrong decision. The friendship he and Ethan had once had was fractured in ways that might never be repaired, and he needed to accept the consequences of that. In time, he hoped he could find a way to redeem himself, but he knew that forgiveness, if it came, would take a long time. Ethan, in turn, felt a bittersweet sense of relief. He had won the battle, he had kept everything he had built, but not without paying a high emotional price. When he was alone, he thought about what could have been different, if he had noticed the signs sooner, if he had spoken to Julia before all this happened. But he knew that this line of thinking would get him nowhere. What was done, and the only thing he could control now was his own future. He spent weeks restructuring the company, making sure nothing could shake what he had built. And, for the first time in a long time, he began to take care of himself. Away from the lies and manipulations, he felt like he could breathe again, that he could start building a new life, even if it was one he had never imagined he would need to rebuild. One morning, while reviewing documents in his office, he received a message from Ryan. A simple message, without attempts to justify or ask for forgiveness, just an admission of guilt. "I made a mistake," he said. "And I'm sorry about that. If you can ever forgive me, I will be here." Ethan looked at the message for a long time before deciding not to respond. "Not because I didn't have feelings about what Ryan had said, but because I knew that for now, it was best to move forward without looking back. Maybe forgiveness would come one day, maybe not. But he had learned that there were times when there was no turning back, and that some wounds simply needed time to heal. As for Julia, the last time Ethan heard from her, she had moved away, trying to start her life over. She knew it would be difficult, that she would have to live with the choices she made, and with the pain of knowing that she had destroyed something that, at one point, had been real. But life went on, and she needed to find a way to move forward, even if the path was lonely and full of regrets. Ethan, on the other hand, has finally found peace. He had faced the betrayal, the blow, and come out the other side stronger. He lost some things along the way, but he also learned more about himself than he ever imagined. And, over time, he found new ways to reconnect with life, with new friendships and opportunities that arose when he least expected it. In the end, each of them reaped exactly what they had sown. Ethan found the freedom to live his life as he always wanted, without the constraints Julia tried to place on him. Ryan had to face the consequences of his bad choices, and Julia, well, she learned that sometimes trying to manipulate others to gain control results in losing everything. And so ends another story full of intrigue, betrayal and important lessons. What did you think? Leave your comment below and share your opinion. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of the next impactful stories. Remember, here on the channel, we do not support any type of betrayal. All stories are fictional and serve to show how these actions can have devastating consequences on people's lives. Until next time.